Welcome back to Heart of the Shore, the podcast from Love of Humanity, where we talk about what matters most to families right here in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and across the Garden State. I'm your host from Love of Humanity, and today we're tackling a phrase you might have heard floating around in the news or at a town council meeting: environmental justice. It sounds official, maybe even abstract, but stick with me because this is one of those topics that touches your daily life in ways you might not expect. We're talking about the air your kids breathe, the water that comes out of your tap, and whether the neighborhood you live in gets the same protections as the one across town. Let's start with the basics. What does environmental justice actually mean? At its core, environmental justice is the idea that no community should bear more than its fair share of pollution, contamination, or environmental risk just because of race, income, or the language spoken at home. For decades, in New Jersey and across the country, low-income neighborhoods and communities of color have been the ones living next to power plants, waste facilities, scrap yards, and industrial sites. That wasn't random. It was the result of zoning decisions, housing policies, and economic pressures that steered polluting facilities toward the communities with the least political power to push back. Think about it this way. If you grew up in a leafy suburb, the idea of living half a mile from an incinerator probably never crossed your mind. But in parts of Newark, Camden, and Elizabeth, families have lived with that reality for generations. Multiple industrial facilities, truck routes, and contaminated sites all layered on top of each other. The health effects show up in the data. Higher rates of asthma, heart disease, and cancer. Higher emergency room visits. Shorter life expectancy. These aren't coincidences. They're patterns, and they follow income and race with disturbing consistency. New Jersey decided to do something about it. In September of 2020, Governor Phil Murphy signed what's now known as the Environmental Justice and Cumulative Impacts Law. It was one of the first laws of its kind in the entire country. The key word there is cumulative. Before this law, regulators would look at a single factory or a single permit in isolation. Does this one facility meet its pollution limits? If yes, permit approved. But that completely ignored what was already there. Imagine a neighborhood that already has a sewage plant, an incinerator, and a trucking depot. Then someone wants to build another facility right next door. Under the old system, that new facility only had to meet its own limits. Nobody was adding up the total burden on the people living there. The new law changed that. Now, when certain types of facilities apply for environmental permits in what the state calls overburdened communities, the Department of Environmental Protection, NJDEP, has to consider the cumulative impact, all the pollution, all the stressors, not just the new one. And if the cumulative burden is too high, NJDEP can deny the permit entirely.
So who counts as an overburdened community? The law defines it pretty clearly. A census block group qualifies if at least 35% of households are low income, or at least 40% of residents identify as minority or members of a state-recognized tribal community, or at least 40% of households have limited English proficiency. Those aren't arbitrary numbers. They're designed to identify the populations that research shows are most vulnerable to environmental harm, the people least likely to have the resources to move away from a pollution source and most likely to suffer the health consequences. How many communities are we talking about? As of the most recent data from the 2020 to 2024 American Community Survey, New Jersey has designated 3,735 census block groups as overburdened communities. That covers about 5.4 million people, well over half the state's population. And yes, that includes parts of Monmouth County. Roosevelt Borough, for example, has areas designated as overburdened under the low-income threshold. Pockets of Asbury Park, Long Branch, Keensburg, and other communities along the shore also qualify. These aren't faraway places. They're our neighbors. Now, here's where it gets real for families. The law targets 8 specific types of facilities: major sources of air pollution, incinerators, sludge processing plants, large sewage treatment plants with a capacity of more than 50 million gallons per day, transfer stations, recycling centers that handle certain materials, scrap metal facilities, and landfills. If any of these want a new permit, an expansion, or a renewal in an overburdened community, they have to prepare something called an Environmental Justice Impact Statement. They have to go through NJDEP's mapping tool called EJMAP, which visualizes all the existing environmental and public health stressors in that community, and they have to hold a public hearing right in the affected neighborhood with a minimum 60-day public comment period. That last part matters a lot. Before this law, permit decisions often happened in government offices miles away. The people most affected, the families breathing the air and drinking the water, rarely had a seat at the table. Now they do. And NJDEP can impose conditions on the facility or flat out deny the permit if it would cause disproportionate harm. As of late 2025, 89 permit applications across 54 municipalities in 18 counties had entered the Environmental Justice Review process. That's real enforcement, not just words on paper. And the courts are backing it up. In January of 2026, just a few months ago, New Jersey's Appellate Court upheld the environmental justice rules in a major decision. Industry groups and labor organizations had challenged the regulations, arguing that they were too broad and too vague. A panel of 3 judges disagreed. In a 70-page opinion, the court affirmed NJDEP's authority across the board. One of the most important parts of the ruling was this. The court said that economic benefits cannot be used to justify new sources of pollution in overburdened communities. In other words, a company can't say, well, we'll create jobs, so you should let us pollute your neighborhood. The court said no. If the environmental and health burden is disproportionate, that's the end of the analysis for new facilities.
Earthjustice, the environmental law organization, called the ruling a major victory. Alejandra Torres from the Ironbound Community Corporation in Newark said, quote, "The decision affirms the years-long organizing of many environmental justice groups like ours who advocated for a law that protects overburdened communities from further pollution." End quote. Dr. Nikki Sheets, chair of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, added that, quote, "Now it must be ensured that the law and the rules are, in reality, implemented in a manner that improves the health of these communities by reducing the amount of pollution that endangers them." End quote. And enforcement isn't just about permits. New Jersey's Attorney General and DEP have filed more than 70 environmental justice lawsuits in overburdened communities since 2018. In 2023 alone, civil enforcement brought in nearly $596 million in recoveries. That includes a landmark settlement of up to $450 million with 3M over PFAS contamination, those so-called forever chemicals that have shown up in drinking water supplies across the state. When we talk about environmental justice, we're not talking about theoretical risk. We're talking about chemicals in the water your family drinks. So what does all of this mean if you're a family in Monmouth County? First, it means you have tools. NJDEP's EJMAP is free and public. You can pull it up online right now and see exactly what environmental stressors exist in your census block group. Are there regulated facilities nearby? What pollutants are they permitted to release? What does the air quality data look like? What about contaminated sites? That information isn't hidden. It's your right to know, and the state built an interactive map specifically so you can access it. Second, it means you have a voice. If a new facility is proposed in or near an overburdened community in your area, there will be a public hearing in the affected neighborhood. Show up. Bring your neighbors. Write comments during the 60-day window. These aren't rubber stamp processes. NJDEP is required to review and respond to public input, and that input can directly affect whether a permit is approved, conditioned, or denied. Third, it means the definition of what counts as a public interest is changing. Under the old way of thinking, if a project brought tax revenue or jobs, that was enough. Under the environmental justice rules, the question is different. Does this facility serve an essential environmental, health, or safety need of the people who actually live there, and is there no other reasonable way to meet that need? That's a much higher bar,
and it's designed to protect the communities that have historically been treated as sacrifice zones, places where pollution was considered acceptable because the people living there didn't have the power to say no.
Now, I want to be honest about the limitations, too. The law covers 8 types of facilities, but not everything that can pollute. Warehouses, for example, are a massive issue in parts of New Jersey. Truck traffic, diesel exhaust, noise, light pollution. The environmental justice law doesn't cover warehouse permits directly. Advocates like Clean Water Action are pushing to expand the scope. And the law primarily addresses new permits and renewals. It doesn't automatically clean up legacy contamination from facilities that have been operating and polluting for decades. That's a separate fight, and it's one where the Attorney General's enforcement work becomes critical. But here's the bigger picture, and this is really what connects to our mission at Love of Humanity. Environmental justice and energy justice are deeply intertwined. The same communities that bear the heaviest pollution burdens are often the ones struggling with the highest energy costs. Here's why. If you live near an industrial facility, you're more likely to have health conditions like asthma or COPD that drive up your medical expenses. You're more likely to live in older housing stock with poor insulation, single-pane windows, and outdated HVAC systems, which means dramatically higher utility bills. You're less likely to own your home, which means less ability to invest in efficiency upgrades, and you're less likely to have access to clean energy programs, community solar, or weatherization assistance, because those programs often require homeownership or upfront investment. That's why we see environmental justice as part of the same continuum as energy relief and food security. When a family is spending a quarter of their income on energy bills, and their kids have asthma rates above the state average because of local air quality, those aren't separate problems. They're the same problem viewed from different angles. The pollution drives the health costs. The health costs drain the family budget. The drained budget means no money for fresh food, for weatherization, for moving to a cleaner neighborhood. It's a cycle, and breaking it requires tackling all of these issues together. So here's what we'd encourage you to do this week. Step 1. Go to the NJDEP Environmental Justice page at dep.nj.gov/EJ. Look up your community on EJMAP. Find out whether your neighborhood is designated as overburdened. Explore the stressor data. Step 2. Connect with local organizations. In Monmouth County, that means your Municipal Environmental Commission, county freeholder meetings when environmental topics are on the agenda, and groups working on environmental health. Step 3. If you or someone you know is struggling with energy bills while living near pollution sources, reach out to us at Love of Humanity. We're building programs that connect families to energy assistance, weatherization, and climate resilience resources. Because here's the truth. Keeping the lights on and the air clean shouldn't be a luxury. Environmental justice means that where you live shouldn't determine whether you're healthy. And in New Jersey, that's not just an aspiration anymore. It's the law.
Thank you for spending this time with us today. If this episode helped you understand something new, share it with a neighbor. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and find us on YouTube. Remember, environmental justice isn't just a law on the books. It's a promise that every family deserves clean air, clean water, and a fair shot, no matter their zip code. Until next time, this is Heart of the Shore. Take care of each other out there.